what's happened now is that from an artist's point of view, if you compare it, if you're old enough to be able to, if you compare it to a pre-internet age, if you like, what an artist has to do now is, or you have the ability as an artist to interact with your fan base 24/7. And there seems to be an endless, voracious appetite by people, so you're led to believe, for trivial shite that you have to keep feeding out there to keep your fan base interested. And I think that's the difficulty as a band, as an artist, should you feel obliged or obligated to Twitter 6 times a day to get your kind of followers up? I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't buy in to that necessarily.
But would you still not say that the one thing that makes a band big is to play often and to play well, and that none of all this other stuff can really sidestep that is still the fundamental truth?
100%. I mean, I think that, what we're finding as a label, and in terms of the relationship that we have with our bands, our expectations that we have of our bands, is it's a partnership, obviously. And just to touch on what you maybe alluded to earlier on, our label's still important? Fucking absolutely. This whole idea that, that with the internet, I mean, essentially what's happened with the internet is that record labels are no longer the sole medium, if you like, for an artist to get their music out there. And that's a good thing, in theory. People should be able to disseminate their music and have people listen to it without necessarily having to go to a label. But to extend that logic by then saying labels are no longer necessary is complete garbage. Record labels can be an essential part of a band's career, because in a lot of respects they have the same goal, not just commercially in terms of selling that artist's music, but a record label like Chemical Underground. We have, we want the same thing as the band want. We want to have credibility. We want to build up a catalogue that is well respected. We want to leave a legacy. We have the same creative investment in what that band is doing than they have, in my opinion. And that's not to say that it's the cult of the label. I don't mean it like that. But, I'm as precious about, how Chemical Underground is perceived as a record label as I am about how that band is perceived by the media and the people that want to buy their records. So what happens now when we work with our bands is it's our job as a record label. We are facilitators. We're soundboards. We're filters. We are creative partners to sit down with the band and say, right, how the fuck are we going to get to where we want to go? How are we going to do it? And it's a partnership, and it works that way. When it works well, it should be there should be a sort of symbiotic thing going on. It's our interest for them to do well. But what's happened with the internet, and what is important as a band, is that the social networking side of things, it is up to the band, really, to utilise them as effectively as possible. And Facebook, like Matthew said, Facebook and Twitter can be incredibly powerful tools. One of our artists, Aidan Moffat from Arab Strap, just recently, a few months ago, started on Twitter. He hadn't been on Twitter before. And if you've ever met Aidan, take it from me, a notorious, curmudgeonly sceptical person. And he started doing Twitter, and he really enjoys it. He gets a lot out of it, followers, and it's helped him immeasurably. So I think there is an awful lot of work for bands to do to get the most out of these social networking things.
So now, can I ask you a question? There are now opportunities to make money in those sort of areas. Say if the bands are doing something, they put it on YouTube, on a YouTube channel, or they do, they maybe there's other things where they can actually generate a small amount of revenue from that area. Is that something where you're then like, okay, that's fine, that's their money, or do you split that with them? How does it work in that respect? I mean, presumably as well, they could be selling downloads on Bandcamp, or they could be giving away free tracks. How does that fit into your model as a label?
From Chemical Underground's point of view, when we work with bands, you might be surprised, I don't know, it's counterproductive for us as a label to have a band selling their stuff on Bandcamp and keeping that money to themselves. Now, there might be people out there going, fuck's sake, but that's the way it is. And in fact, it happened with us with Found. And we sat down with Found, and they had been doing their stuff with Bandcamp, and we said, right, now that we're working together, you're going to, it's best not to do that, because we want to channel traffic through the label and split the money that way. That's not to say that, Bandcamp and merchandise, which is a separate issue, there isn't a place for it. Of course there is. But, it goes back, if you like, to what I'd said earlier about, when you sign to a label, or to a label like Chemical Underground, it's essentially about pooling resources and making sure that you're kind of heading down the one path. And, I think that's only right.
Did Found say yes to that, by the way?
Yeah.
Right. So what if Found start giving away tracks, saying, I mean, they do a lot of remixes, or things of theirs have been remixed. If they say, right, okay, we want to give away a track every month now on Bandcamp, how do you perceive that as a label? I mean, would you rather they didn't do that? Because presumably a band has a slightly different agenda. They might be saying, right, okay, well, we're about to go on tour. We're going to give away a track for, each day we're on tour, or a remix. And, you're sitting there going, well, we've got an album coming out soon. Can you reconcile these two things?
You sit down at a table over a pint and you talk about it and you figure out whether it makes sense or not. You just say, well, we want to give some tracks away or whatever. And you would sit and say, right, well, are they album tracks? No. Good. All right, then on you go. It's just, it is, and I didn't mean that I'm not trying to belittle the question. I mean that, it comes back to the thing I'd said about a partnership, and I think it's about being able to sit down with people you can trust and sit and say, right, how can we get, this is a question that we ask each other, or ask our artists, and we talk amongst ourselves as a label all the time. How can we get the most out of this tour or that single or that
It's
album?
not hard to dissuade bands from giving stuff away for free. Usually they're just delighted if you can explain to them how they can possibly charge for it.
Yeah, but I think it all we shouldn't set these up as either or propositions. Yeah. Give it away or sell it.
No,
label
it's more of how do you reconcile it? Because it is quite easy to perceive two divergent directions, and I think there are areas where there might potentially be conflict. That's why it's so interesting to see how you can resolve this. I mean, obviously, Stewart can do it over a pint, but I imagine it might be slightly more complicated if you're dealing with Sony and they've got you tied into a contract that's pages and pages long.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised how they understand the value of doing that and why you do it. I think the DIY versus label should be more of a conversation of DIY and labels. This is thank you. I don't know who that was, but we should chat after. I have a fan. No, no. It's that in this new world, it's yes to all of it. It's not this or that, and that an artist's obligation now in this world is to create more stuff than ever. And I say stuff because it's all kinds of stuff, and they need to communicate to their audience. And it's funny because, a bunch of people clapped when, the thing with, Stewart said about the internet and, and I understand all the problems, but I had a conversation last night. I was talking about this author, Scott Stratton, who wrote a book called Unmarketing. Do you know this book? Do you know this guy? You should, if not. You know, and he talks about social currency, the same way that we might talk about, you know, currency as in terms of banknotes. And when people say, oh, this whole internet thing, it's not working for me. I tried it. I set up a Twitter account and I tweeted for like a couple of months. I didn't make anything and I stopped. His analogy is, imagine going to the bank and opening up a business account and say, okay, I open up the account. And then the next day you go back and say, I'd like to withdraw, you know, 5,000 pounds. And they go, well, your bank balance is zero. You haven't actually added anything to it yet, so you can't really withdraw anything. Oh, well, this whole banking thing sucks. It doesn't work at all. And if that's your strategy on social networks, is just trying to withdraw out of it, you're using it as only a bank where you withdraw and not make deposits, then it won't work for you. You have to think of your social currency in this world of what are you putting back in before you start making those withdrawals later.
Now, there's something I wanted to go back to, and this is this idea of the filter and the fact that, you know, we're swamped with shite. Now, it's interesting to me, this, because I couldn't tell you what's in the charts anymore. I listen.
Do you care? I mean,
no.
Who cares?
But that's the thing. I listen to a lot of stuff, a lot of bands online, and that's how I check them out. It's, you know, it's, to me, you know, my filters might be slightly different. It might be something that one of my mates has tipped me off. But I think, in a way, have things really changed that much? I mean, in the past, you know, I'd argue that the filters weren't, you know, often these filters were clogged with shit. And you take something like PWL, like in the 80s, that just dominated the charts with utter worthless dross. And, you know, that was noise. That was a noise on immense scale, and you couldn't get any decent music.
I must rant about this, because this really bugs me as well. I have no problem whatsoever with the sea of shit that is out there on the internet. Most of the stuff that I like the best is what people would say is the sea of shit. These little weird guy in California uploaded 4 tracks to his Bandcamp page, vanished, sent me a stupid email in all caps saying, oh, you might want to listen. He is the sea of shit, and it was brilliant. And I would so much rather listen and find that kind of stuff and mosey my way through the crap and find the people who, you know, find a little podcaster or somebody who writes a good blog, or find your favorite radio shows. And, you know, there are people out there filtering it. But the fact that this filter is gone, I think, is brilliant. I don't want to be told what to bloody listen to by Radio 1. I mean, I've never in my life listened to Radio 1. I don't read the NME. All of these filters, when they were here, they just fed us mediocre music. I did not like most of it. And I'm really pleased that...
Well, I mean, I agree. I used to get, you know, when it was still in the days of vinyl, I'd get almost by the truckload this utter crap. And that was the supposed filters. I mean, that was the big labels that were foisting this dross on me. And in a way, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm with you on this. I mean, I'm almost like, I can't quite get my head around the idea that somehow it was better. I mean, obviously, present company accepted, and, you know, labels like Domino and stuff, but they're not the majority. Surely they're not the majority of labels. I mean, are the majority of labels really putting out great stuff? Are they really the filter that you look to?